This weekend here at the Reagan Library, I sat down with two current lawmakers, both military veterans. Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, a Marine Corps captain who served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. And Republican Congressman Michael Waltz from Florida, a combat decorated Green Beret who served multiple tours in Afghanistan. So we are here at the Reagan National Defense Forum, and we've got a lot of survey results, and I'm going to start with a tough one and let you guys speak to it. Folks were asked, do you have trust and confidence in Congress? 5 said a great deal. 21% said some. That leaves you with 71% who said little or no trust and confidence in Congress. Why do you think that is?
Because we're dysfunctional. I mean, for the first time in history, we didn't have a speaker for 3 weeks. That's never happened before. And that doesn't send a good message to our allies, to our adversaries around the globe. It doesn't send a good message to the American people. In fact, one of the most frequent questions I get from my friends, people who love me, is, Seth, why do you keep doing this? But actually, I think it's a really important time for all those reasons to keep doing this.
Well, look, I mean, a little bit of that I'd throw back on the media. You know, we love to cover the train wreck, and that gets covered a lot. But there's actually a lot of bipartisan work that does get done. Case in point, our defense bill came out of the committee that Seth and I serve on nearly unanimously the last 61 years. So there's a lot of work that gets done. I don't think everybody's fully aware of it. But at the same time, I have a lot of folks that ask me, well, you know, what are you guys doing up there? And my response as a small government conservative is as little as possible. I want, aside from defending the nation, I want D.C. out of your lives as much as possible. And I think a lot of things should be powered down to state and local. So I get the numbers, but a lot of my job is to, one, oversee the administration, but then two is to keep D.C. out of your lives. I don't think one size fits all coming out of Washington is necessarily the solution.
Well, you all have very different perspectives on a number of big issues, but you do share that you've been veterans. You have served our country in uniform, and that's going to give you a unique perspective, obviously, on how you see things on the Hill. You mentioned national defense authorization. That's among the many things you guys have got to get done. I mean, that's something that's really not optional. So you guys have served in uniform. What does it mean to the men and women in uniform to go from CR to CR, to watch the NDAA possibly get stuck with a couple of folks who have real objections to very specific things?
The most important thing that our military needs to do right now is modernize as quickly as possible to meet a totally new generation of threats. And we can't do that if we just copy last year's budget and make it this year's budget. That's what a CR does. So when we don't have a functional Congress that can't pass budgets, can't get the NDAA done, the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual defense bill that should be totally bipartisan. If we can't do that expeditiously, that sends the wrong message to our troops. We should be here to support our troops, and we're not doing a great job.
But there are some measures that were tucked in, primarily by conservatives in the House, that Democrats aren't going to vote for. They don't like some of the provisions that have been included with respect to abortion or other cultural issues. How do you defend those when it comes to getting the money in place for the military?
Well, look, I mean, one of the provisions was a ban on critical race theory. That was actually my provision. I think we have to fight hard to keep the military a meritocracy. Race, religion, socioeconomic background, your politics, that should be left at the door. We need the best of the best. I understand that's controversial to some. But you know, some things we're going to push in there, and then the vast majority we do end up agreeing on, because when it comes to the threats we face from China, Russia, Iran, the global threat of terrorism, the reporting is clear that, one, we've never faced the threats like we face today, and then two, our military is aging. We are spending actually record low amounts on it in terms of percentage of GDP compared to the Cold War. And I think Seth's right in that we have a solemn obligation. If we're going to send men and women out in those planes, tanks, and ships, they have to have the best equipment, the best training, and the best resources. That is one of the reasons I think we're both passionate about getting more veterans into Congress and back into our political system.
So you've also got to look at funding that goes outside the U.S. that does impact national security interests and our allies. Yeah. You've got Israel, you've got Ukraine. The White House wants a supplemental that puts everything together. I'm supposing that you two may have differences of opinion on whether you can get something done clean on Israel, standalone measure, yes or no?
Well, I think the problem is that, in my experience, a lot of Republicans support Ukraine behind the scenes and then aren't willing to vote for it in public, and
But
that's why.
I mean,
but you're right. But it's so far, right? But the question is that changing? I mean, you're seeing the number of Republicans voting against funding for Ukraine go up. I understand it's a tough political position for many Republicans back home. I mean, actually, what we're trying to do by putting these things together is fundamentally make it easier for getting this funding passed, which we know is important to our allies around the globe because it sends a message to Vladimir Putin, to Xi Jinping, to every autocrat that thinks they're just going to bully us and our allies, that you're not going to get away with it.
At this moment, though, would you vote for a standalone for Israel? Standalone aid bill?
Not if it imperiled funding for Ukraine. But, I mean, look, if we pass funding for Ukraine so we get over that hurdle and then it means voting for a standalone for Israel, sure.
Well, look, I mean, on the Ukraine piece, I think we are past the point of blank checks, don't ask questions, just send, I'm Joe Biden, trust me, and send me tens of billions of dollars. And it is astounding to me that he hasn't articulated to this day, what does the end state look like? What does success look like? Is fully ejecting the Russians from Crimea a critical national interest of the United States? How long is it going to take? How much money is it going to cost? What's the strategy to get there? And the frustration that I know a lot of Democrats share is that the president has essentially dithered us now into a stalemate by not giving them what they needed up front to win. And so here we are stuck essentially in a war of attrition, and to say, hey, you Republicans, go to your taxpayers. I'm not going to articulate what success looks like and tell them to dig deeper in their pockets. Meanwhile, the Europeans, the Germans in particular, just voted down their defense budget, their 2% commitment. Look, we have a lot of questions, and I think it should be dealt with separately. And the administration needs to answer these for the American people. How much longer is this going to go, Shannon?
Look, we have to go to our taxpayers too, right? It's not just Republican taxpayers that are funding this, and I think actually the administration has been very careful along the way to make sure that we give the Ukrainians what they need without escalating to a larger war with Russia. So there is debate about this point, but I don't want to lose the bipartisanship here because some of the questions that Mike is bringing up about what is the end game. I mean, this is a big question that I've been asking for Israel, Netanyahu. It's a question we need to ask Ukraine as well. That's a fair question for us to have in Congress in a bipartisan way. It's a fair question for the American people to have.